Thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. Get access to my streaming video service Nebula when you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description. Now, in lockdown, many people have been discovering or rediscovering learning a musical instrument, which is fantastic. And while I know I could always be learning more on the guitar, I thought I would reconnect with the viola, an instrument I actually studied at university but haven't played properly in 9 years for reasons I'll explain later. So this video is an introduction for curious music lovers who aren't really aware of the differences between the violin and viola or aware that I used to play it. But even if you are familiar, I want to talk a little bit about why it's often the butt of orchestra jokes and why I've always loved it despite its underdog status. Okay, I know I can't make a video about the viola without referencing a joke or two, or four, scattered throughout this video. I mean, I have to beat the comments section to it. Why do violas stand for long periods of time outside people's houses? They can't find the key and they don't know when to come in. Viola jokes supposedly originated in the 18th century because at the time composers were writing relatively easy parts sandwiched between the prominent melodies favoured in the violins and cellos. As they weren't used as solo instruments, Stephen Cottrell writes that most players were lowly paid and of low social standing. I mean, try taking a bassist, any musician, home to your parents, and you'll realise we're all seen that way. The viola is part of the violin family alongside the cello and double bass. They haven't changed in construction since the 18th century, and the viola is the middle or alto voice within string quartets, ensembles, and orchestras. The playing technique is very similar to the violin, but the first thing you'll notice is the size. Violas can be up to 4 inches larger than violins. That means you need to stretch your fingers further apart to hit each note, and you'll have to press the string a little harder too. The viola's bow is also slightly longer and heavier, and the strings are thicker and more resistant to the bow, which means you have to give a stronger bow to produce a fuller sound. The tuning is also different, so it still has 4 strings, but instead of a top E string, it has a low C string. So the same strings as a cello, but just the octave above. This is why the cellist's repertoire is often arranged for viola, i.e. the Bach cello suites. How was the canon invented? 2 violists were trying to play the same passage together. All right. So let's go over the parts of the viola. From top to bottom, you have the scroll, the pegs, the nut, neck, fingerboard, strings, 2 F-holes, the bridge, tailpiece, chin rest, shoulder rest, and then the bow. The overall body shape resembles the human form, similar to the guitar, so it has a waist. However, inside, between the curved belly and back, you have a sound post which transmits the vibrations of the strings. Let's take a closer look at the bow. This is the point or the tip, which usually has a metal or ivory plate protecting it, and then you have a long tapered bow stick that's usually curved inward toward the hair. Yes, the hair is from a horse's tail. Then this is where you place the bow between your right hand fingers and thumb. You then have a screw, which is how the hair is tightened and loosened, the heel or frog, and then you'll need rosin, which is a solid form of resin that you drag the bow through, and it helps create friction between the hair and strings to produce sound. It also makes it rather dusty, so keep a cloth nearby. Why am I having so much fun doing this? Logan asks, Would you have to get new strings for the viola and a new viola bow frequently? Seeing videos of Jimmy Page using a cello bow, he had to use a new bow every night. Thankfully not. Dragging any kind of bow across a guitar will definitely ruin the hairs. Guitar strings are much harsher than viola strings, and although getting bows rehaired is a thing, it's not something that you need to do all that often. That would be incredibly expensive, and you can't really change the bow hairs yourself. It takes a skilled luthier to look after these sorts of string instruments. It's actually awful when you break a string on the viola. It does happen, but rarely, and it's most likely to be your A string as it's the thinnest. They take a while to warm up and sound quite harsh when they're brand new, so you have to play it in quite a lot to blend in with the other strings. Thomas asks, have you ever lost a small object through the F-hole? No, I have not. Luckily, because plectrums aren't involved, you're not likely to lose a plectrum down one of them. Let's talk notation, because this is something that throws a lot of people and composers off. Richard asks, is the viola a bass clef instrument? No, you actually read alto clef as a viola player, and sometimes to avoid excessive ledger lines, it will slip into treble clef. It's not as bizarre as it looks. The middle note in the stave is C, but the octave above the low C string. Simon asks, how long does it take to learn where all the correct notes are on the instrument? I'm a piano and guitar player, and the idea of learning an instrument without keys or frets seems daunting. Like any instrument, it takes some getting used to. I mean, there are probably a few more years spent scrubbing away on an instrument like the violin or viola. No. Than on the guitar. Piano keys and guitar frets definitely help you make a nicer sound from the get-go. However, those instruments also have their own challenges that you don't really face with the viola. So although I can play double stops, you mostly would just play individual notes. Then yes, to be able to play in tune, you have to train your ear. Sight reading and oral training are drilled into you and are important aspects of the graded exams I took when I was young, and skills you have to be fluent in if you want to progress, even just as a proficient amateur. How is lightning like a violist's fingers? Neither one strikes in the same place twice. That hurts because that one's actually pretty true for someone like me. Ooh. Elia asked, why does everyone hate the viola? I think it sounds nice. It's honestly a beautiful sounding instrument, more so when it's played by a professional, and that's the thing. It's actually rare to meet a violist that wasn't once a violinist, and then most professional violinists can play the viola too, so it's always seen as a secondary instrument, but it's still very much needed in quartets and orchestras. It's just the scapegoat of the orchestra. The viola isn't often recommended by music teachers because of the limited solo repertoire. Luckily, in the 20th century, it actually saw a resurgence thanks to Walton and Bartók's viola concerti, and Rebecca Clark and Hindemith liked writing for it because they were both viola players themselves. But the 18th century masters rarely wrote for four independent string voices. There are a few exceptions, including Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante for violin and viola, which elevates the viola to equal standing in a duet with the violinist, and a chamber orchestra as an accompaniment. But otherwise, violas were just left chugging away in the middle of the orchestra. Now, I can't forget that Berlioz wrote Harold in Italy in 1834, which was one of the first to give the viola a truly independent voice in orchestral writing. But it's not my favourite piece. It's a bit boring. When there is such a limited repertoire, why would you choose the viola as an instrument to study, let alone pursue as a career? That leads me on to my personal experience with the viola. So yes, I began violin age 6 and played up until I was 14, 15, around then. Then I found the viola thanks to a programme put on by my community Saturday morning music school called Salisbury Area Young Musicians. They wanted to encourage violinists to switch to viola. So they gave 6 weeks of free lessons and even lent us instruments. It was a baptism of fire as they needed players for upcoming concerts. I know how crazy that sounds now when music programs are being defunded left, right, and centre, and it's actually a personal goal. I want to grow this channel enough so one day I'll be able to fund music grants, bursaries, and scholarships for kids wanting to learn music in communities that have lost their music education programs. It's part of my why. I owe so much to SAYM and all the performing opportunities they gave me, as well as how much they helped me develop a work ethic. I mean, teenagers and early mornings don't often go that well together. Now, I knew I was never going to be professional because I had singing, songwriting, and guitar, but then I was told by a rather curmudgeonly music teacher that I wouldn't be able to make a career out of pop music either, and I'd still need to go to a good university to have any kind of prospects. My contemporary songwriting did wield a more positive response from my university professors, but they didn't have a pathway for that. So doing a postgrad at one of the London music colleges briefly crossed my mind whilst at university because I was spending hours in a basement practice room and in rehearsals, and I loved playing in my string quartet with some of my closest friends and then the orchestras, but competition is so fierce. I didn't want it enough, and I knew I wouldn't be able to survive the elitism and snobbery of the classical world. Ted and William asked similar questions about transitioning back and forth from viola to guitar and how has it benefited my songwriting. Now, I'd say my classical training has definitely helped me cross over into popular music and therefore must help my songwriting. I've spent years learning music theory and harmony, like since I was 6 years old, and it must have had an effect. But switching from the viola to guitar isn't all that strange because it's not something I often do. They're very different instruments. It feels much weirder to play the bass guitar after playing acoustic. Hayden asks, you have an imaginary viola gig in 1 week. What's your performance going to look like? Well, if I had to be a soloist, I'd freak out. I suffered a lot from bow shake because I was usually under-rehearsed and attempting repertoire far beyond my abilities. So much so I had to go to my GP before my final uni exam and ask for beta blockers to calm my nerves. I do not know how I can get up on stage and perform my own original music and be vulnerable for hours on end, yet I can't bear the thought of performing a solo on the viola, even just playing one note in front of another person. However, if it were a string quartet or an orchestra gig, I'd love to do that again, and I think I'd still be okay as a sight reader. Maybe, might need a bit more practice. I don't ever remember playing this one. I must have played it at some point. What's this? Oh my god. Ah, here we go again. How do you keep your violin from getting stolen? Put it in a viola case. Okay, on that note, I'm going to wrap up this particular video, but keep watching to find out how to access an extended version where I talk a little bit more about my performance anxiety and why I stopped playing the viola. I love the fact that it felt like my instrument when surrounded by hundreds of violinists and flautists growing up. The viola made me different and actually got me further than if I'd just kept playing the violin. Switching meant that I was in a smaller pool of musicians, so it was easier to rise to the top. Now, it meant I couldn't slack at the back of the second violins. Instead, it meant I went on to lead the viola sections in multiple orchestras, including Bristol University Symphony Orchestra, which was really difficult to get into, and it meant that I played alongside the best musicians at university who've gone on to be professionals. Final year highlight was my quartet being paired with a professional quartet to perform Mendelssohn's Octet, which is an astounding piece of music. Now, I have a little more to say about my experience as a viola player and why the viola has fallen victim to criticism and been ignored by the classical world. Obviously, I love fighting for the underdog, but YouTube isn't the right place for that, and that's why I've put an extended version of this video on Nebula. I've recently joined this incredible platform created by creators you might recognize, where we don't need to worry about demonetization, copyright strikes, or the algorithm. It's called Nebula, and we're so lucky to be partnering with CuriosityStream. This is giving us flexibility to create ad-free videos and also experiment with different kinds of content. Like, this platform is already a great place to hang out with a really exciting future. Hint, hint. If you like this episode, the version I've put up on Nebula removes this ad completely and lets me talk freely about my own personal experience facing bias in the classical music world for being a viola player. Nebula features a lot of YouTube's top creators like Thomas Frank and Legal Eagle, and then especially the music world content creators. You might have heard of them: Adam Neely, Polyphonic, 12 Tone, and Charles Cornell. If you aren't already aware, CuriosityStream is the best place on the internet to see thousands of the world's finest documentaries and non-fiction titles and exclusive series they produced. And they obviously love educating and therefore love educational creators. We worked out a deal that if you sign up for CuriosityStream with the link in the description, you'll also get a Nebula subscription for free. And just to give you a little bit more information, that Nebula subscription isn't a trial. It's free for as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. For a limited time only, CuriosityStream is offering 26% off their annual plans. That's less than $15 a year for CuriosityStream and Nebula. And as you've got to be inside and when you're not practicing your instrument, why not watch Maestro or Stradivarius Mysteries of the Supreme Violin? I thoroughly recommend those two documentaries. If you click on the link in the description or go to curiositystream.com/Mary Spender, it helps me and my fellow creators keep producing informative content. So, what do you think of the viola now I've given a little introduction to this beautiful and melancholy instrument? Do you want to see more about the classical music world on this channel? I mean, I've got to put that music degree to good use somehow, right? Thanks for watching, and of course, thanks to my Patreon supporters for writing in questions. But otherwise, I'll see you very soon.
Slipping time